Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, how do people and nature interact? How does nature benefit people and which interactions have the greatest impacts? And how can research into these questions help tackle some of the biggest issues facing wildlife today? Now, these are some of the questions which today's guest has dedicated his career to tackling. Kevin Gaston is a Professor of Biodiversity and Conservation at the University of Exeter in the UK. His work ranges from characterising people's personalised ecologies to identifying priority areas for nature recovery. In this podcast, we talk about his fascinating research and focus and also discuss an exciting 5-year programme he's co-leading called Renew. Now, Renew is a collaborative programme between the University of Exeter, the National Trust and many other partners, seeking to reshape our understanding and action on biodiversity renewal across scales, creating knowledge and influencing national institution, communities and individuals. In this episode, we discuss his research focus, the Renew programme, and his career journey so far. Kevin also shares his advice for aspiring conservation scientists, and also we discuss how the skills needed within the sector might be changing and evolving into the future. It's a wide-ranging, interesting, and impactful discussion. Enjoy.
So I'm Kevin Gaston. I'm Professor of Biodiversity and Conservation at the University of Exeter.
Great, and welcome to the podcast, Kevin. Thank you for joining us and thanks for sharing your precious time with us. We're here to talk about your research, particularly a new program that you're involved with called the Renew program. And we want to hear a little bit more about your career, your job, your advice, things like that. Let's start with your research focus. I've done a little bit of research on you before the call too. You're interested in the interactions between people and nature and how they support one another and how even early interactions with nature can kind of shape your life and shape your career and things like that. What were your early interactions with nature and how has it shaped your life?
So I'm one of those who was kind of in nature and engaging with nature from knee high. So that's been a lifelong thing. And I guess that probably shaped pretty much everything. I mean, I can't imagine not being so engaged. And that very much ended up shaping kind of everything that I've done, really. Yeah.
And do you have like early memories? I mean, were your parents taking you out in nature or, you know, what was particularly... Were there any particular moments or aspects in early childhood that actually connected you through, or is it a case of you were outside a lot doing certain things?
I was outside quite a lot, but so I've shared this in other contexts. So my father was an engineer, and so actually nature wasn't kind of very much his thing, but he was very much into data. So we used to go out every week counting the great crested grebes on the nearby lake, so that we could get graphs and data and trends. And so that was much of my early days were actually very much around collecting information and being systematic about things. And I guess, you know, for much of my career, I've been obsessed with what makes things common and what makes them things rare. And I mean, I guess you can draw a line between some of those early experiences and that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that really is what kind of conservation research is all about. Why is that common? Why is that rare? Put simply, isn't it? So it's a nice way of thinking about it. So what is your particular area of research now, Kevin? Like what topics or areas are you most interested in as a kind of conservation scientist or as a researcher?
So broadly, as you've alluded to, about the interactions between nature and people, interested in both directions. So what are the impacts of people on nature? So we've been doing a lot of work for a long time now, particularly around what happens at night, artificial lighting, how big an impact, how that's reshaping much of what we might call nocturnal nighttime ecology. But I'm interested in very many pressures on natural systems and how they're responding. And then on the other side, what are the impacts of nature upon people? and moving. I guess we did quite a lot of work around ecosystem services and the broad benefits that humanity gets. But increasingly, I've been focusing on what I call personalised ecologies. So each of us has a set of interactions with nature. They change through the day, through the week, through your year, through your lifetime. And what are the consequences of that? In part for your health and well-being, but more broadly also for your attitudes, your behavior towards biodiversity and nature. What does that mean for conservation? What does that mean for, frankly, the future of biodiversity?
So how an interaction with nature on a day to week, a month, a year level can change not just your well-being, but actually how you view and how you might support nature conservation, or am I framing that right?
Yes, absolutely. So for people who have in a world where increasingly large proportions of people are very disengaged, very urbanized existences, very indoor existences, becoming increasingly subject to what we would call the extinction of experience, so more and more distant from their nature interactions. So does that matter? And when we're at a time when we're in a biodiversity crisis, how does that shape the discourse, the support, the behaviors that people may undertake about the future of that biodiversity? If you're more distant from it, do you care less? Does it concern you less? Are you less engaged?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess one of the biggest issues that we're facing as a kind of conservation movement is trying to grow the support that we receive from the wider public. I think we're quite good at preaching to the converted, if I can kind of use that phrase, talking to people who are already interested in conservation, already care about wildlife. What about everyone else? How do we grow this movement and get other people engaged? And it feels like that's a sort of an area that your work can be helping with.
Yes, and I think many people still don't understand our utter reliance upon nature and natural systems.
Yeah,
that's increasingly alien to people. I think in particularly in many Western societies, I think fear around nature and not knowing quite what to do when you're in nature, and is it a scary thing? So that's been growing. So what we might call biophobias. And how does that, that seems to be a setting that's really important in understanding the influences on conservation, government policies around nature, what the future of nature is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And just to bring that to life a little bit more, like how do you go specifically about tackling some of these research questions? Can you kind of give an example of a project or a study or something that you've been involved with that's kind of tackled a question relating to this that's perhaps had an interesting research outcome that would be, interesting to share?
So looking at beginning to explore some of the fundamentals of that personalized ecology. I mean, how different is it between people?
Yeah.
I mean, so those kind of things, and what are people's nature experiences? How much time do they spend outside? The fact that actually for many people that's very small, and probably nationally often diminishing or internationally diminishing. And then trying to link that through to issues of health and well-being, and your attitudes and behaviors. So we're interested. A lot of the work we do is around those kind of, and also flipping on its head and saying which bits of nature are contributing disproportionately to those experiences. So to give you a kind of tangible, we were interested in the population of trees, for example, and are some trees? Well, I mean, the answer is that some trees provide a lot of nature interactions with people and some very little. And you say, well, that begs interesting questions about the values of different trees. What does that mean when we increase their numbers? And so I'm trying to understand that two-way interaction between people and nature.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've not really had a discussion with anyone else around this particular subject, actually. I find it quite fascinating. I think people intuitively understand that nature can bring well-being benefits to us, and that we obviously have huge impacts on nature. That's well published. And perhaps, I guess, during COVID times, when we were all locked down and had one trip a day, very locally to where we were when the roads were quiet and the skies were quiet, a lot of people reconnected with nature in a different way, or realized it was there and could hear and see it more clearly than before. Has that even had an impact on your research? Is that something that researchers have looked at about, how that kind of COVID experience has connected and related, to people?
Yes, people have done that, and and essentially, actually, how ephemeral quite a lot of that was.
Right, coming on.
A lot of people, yes, engaged a lot more. It was, one might argue almost that when you took people's access away, in a sense, you reduce their zone of operations, and you kind of, then people really craved it a lot more. And then when you release those constraints, then actually they didn't exploit it quite so much. But this is, we call this personalized ecology because it's a really personalized thing.
Yeah.
So, the decisions that you make to engage, not engage, where you go, when you go, how long you're there, how you relate to, is the robin do you regard the robin in your garden as your robin and no one else's robin? It's a very personalized thing, and differs and is unique to each of us. So we all have a different set of interactions, composition of interactions, the way we view those, the things we want to emphasize. Are you a plant person? Are you a bird person? Do you notice insects? Do you not notice? It's a really very personal thing, but actually has potentially very profound consequences.
Yeah. And from my own perspective, so I started off as a fisherman, sitting on the banks of the riverside. And from that, and sitting waiting for hours and hours and not catching many fish, I became more interested in the birds and the wildlife. And my entry point, the gateway drug for me was fishing. Right. And things expand out. And I guess everyone has their own journey and something similar like that. I'm really conscious of time today, so I want to make sure we kind of cover our topics. And we're here really to talk about this new partnership that you're working, a 5-year program called Renew, which obviously relates quite closely to your research topic and things close to your heart. So tell us just briefly, just in a nutshell, so we'll go into more detail, but what is Renew? Like what are you seeking to achieve, or what is it seeking to tackle?
So Renew is a big multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary research project, 5 years. Got about 50 or 60 people working on the project at the moment.
Wow.
And the central premise, so we have to move beyond simply protecting the nature and biodiversity that's still there.
Yeah.
We have, particularly in large areas of Western Europe, we've reduced it to such a level that actually, now we desperately need to regrow that, renew that biodiversity, that nature. So technically, you could argue we kind of know how to do that. We have the understanding of how to go out there and create wetlands, to create woodlands and so forth, and heathlands and those things. There's still things to be learned, and time is a really important thing in all those things. But basically, the issue that the challenge is really, how do we carry people with us? How do we make this? How does this become recognized as a significant priority? Both across sort of communities, across those who are managing landscapes and land, and those who are running businesses, and across society at large. So that's what Renew is about, is how do we bring about more equitable distribution of benefits? How do we help local government to understand how it figures biodiversity in its other considerations? How do we help land managers who may be having to trying to make an income off growing food or whatever, and biodiversity is just one more thing to have to worry about. So how do we deal with that? And how do we help businesses balance the twin things of what pressure they're putting on nature and on biodiversity, and how much they're dependent upon nature and biodiversity. And there's this two-way interaction. How do we bring biodiversity as an increasing consideration into the boardroom?
Yeah, gosh, A lot of questions, a lot of people, and 5 years as well. So plenty of time to get your teeth stuck into it. Yeah, we talked a little bit about the biodiversity crisis. Perhaps before we go into kind of more details about the program and how you're going to tackle some of those research questions, could you just paint a picture as to how do you characterize the biodiversity crisis that we're currently in, which I guess is the main goal of the Renew program? Like what is the state of nature right now? How would you kind of how would you characterize that to others?
So we've massively depleted nature globally, pretty much, and often pushing levels down to distressingly low proportions of what would naturally be in different areas, I think, thinking about this in the UK kind of context, to levels where actually we rank very badly, not just in Europe, but globally in terms of the level of destruction and loss of biodiversity and depletion of biodiversity and depletion of nature. So, and given and I guess you've got almost these twin kind of trends in that's been there's that going on the one hand, and then a growing recognition of our fundamental dependence upon nature in sort of almost all aspects of our lives, whether that's our food or our health, our well-being, etc., etc. And so yes, and I think in much of the world now we have moved beyond the situation of saying actually the goal is simply to protect what's left. We've moved beyond that. We now need to recover, to renew biodiversity back. I'm not saying we want to turn the clock back to kind of what was here before people were here, but bringing that balance needs to be brought to the fore.
Yeah. I've always felt like the word conservation is a terrible word for what we do, because it feels like maintaining status quo, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to renew, or restore, or trying to not turn the clock back, as you say, but bring nature back to more healthy, thriving, sustainable levels.
Yeah, and we chose the term renew as trying to kind of capture that. Yeah. Although you can criticize any term in this space as to whether you're wilding, restoring, etc. But that sense that we need to move beyond. I'm not saying that we stop protecting what's left. Of course, that's vital. Yep. But actually, we need to renew and to regrow and to restore nature.
Yeah. So what do you expect to happen across the next 5 years of the program? I'm assuming we're in the early stages of the program. I think I've got that right. Yeah. What's the planned activities, and what do you hope to have achieved, towards the end of the work?
So fundamentally, this isn't about the research and academic community sort of working in isolation. Yeah. We're working very closely with different sectors, different communities, with local government, with lots of land managers, with lots of businesses, to actually develop approaches, often through co-design approaches, and often initially at quite small scales, understanding, but then with the goal of how do we build those things, those nature, those pro-nature approaches, those pro-renewal approaches. That could then be rolled out on much bigger scale. We can't pretend that over a 5-year period we're going to see the renewal of biodiversity large across the UK. Yeah. But actually, we're working very closely. So the project is co-run with the National Trust, yep. Who have aspirations to increase nature across much of their estate. So there's gives us opportunities to trial things, to work with them, and for them also to want to roll those things out more broadly. We have lots of partners. We have about 33 organizations involved with this, in very, very different kinds of organizations. Some of them are conservation charities and NGOs. Some of them are coming out of finance sectors. Some of them are coming out of land management sectors. Yeah. So trying to build that community interested in and driven to make these kinds of changes.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely exciting. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see where things go, and obviously 5 years is like that, I think you've got to keep expectations real. I get that, but the National Trust is a large landowner and got, significant budgets and staff also. So it's exciting to be working with them. From a practical viewpoint, Kevin, like where did the idea come from? How did you design and develop the program? How did you secure the funding? Just was it a funding call that you then pulled together a consortium and then put a proposal together? Did you already have the idea ready and you pitched it to different donors? Like, how did that idea work? And just to throw another question in the mix, how did you feel when you secured it?
So yes, it was a response to a funding call, a funding opportunity. Of course, these things build on ideas that you already have and directions of travel. I mean, particularly, we were interested here in bringing together the research expertise of the university and the ambitions of the National Trust. This particular call was for big environmental challenges. And an opportunity to bring together also a very interdisciplinary team. And this kind of work that we're describing here is really, it's not just about classical conservation biologists.
No.
It requires political scientists and people from the business school and a whole array of different people. So an opportunity to do that. And so, yes, I mean, and lots of work over many months framing just how the pitch and detailing the pitch of of what you're wanting to do, how you're going to do it, what are things that you could reasonably argue that you could do on this kind of time scale. As you say, 5 years is a long time, but no, it's not. It's actually goes very quickly. So throughout working with other organizations as to how do we marry up the research priorities and goals with what they saw as the priorities and goals, and where do we find that the sweet spot for making most progress most rapidly. So that's very much. How did we feel when we got it? Euphoric, I think, would be the answer. I think that was the best part of the year. In planning and putting that bid together and going through the whole process.
I can imagine, yeah. And euphoria must suddenly become reality at some point. Like, right, we've got to do this now. We've committed, it started, let's go. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more then about you and your work then, if we can. So you are a research professor at the University of Exeter. What's it like to be a professor at university? Like, how would you characterize your job? Do you have a typical day or a week? Are you out in the field? Are you pushing emails around? What's it like?
Busy.
Yeah.
Much of the time.
Yeah.
What's it like? That's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it?
Mm.
At times it's enormous fun. At times it's, at times I'm not a great fan of administration, but that's kind of part of where things go. It's that blend of, the things that you have to do and the things that you enjoy doing, I guess, like probably any job. But with that academic freedom is still there to actually, we have license to think through some of the big challenges that humanity faces at the moment, and how we're going to deal with those. And I mean, I guess a sense of, on my part, certainly a sense of responsibility around that. How do you most effectively contribute to that? How do you make what you're doing more relevant, more useful things? So I guess kind of life is a whole mix of those different things.
Are you involved in a lot of teaching? Like what's your kind of different responsibilities or roles, within your kind of varied life as an academic?
So I've taught for much of my career, but I don't teach at the moment. I mean, I'm very much focused on research and interactions with external organisations and this agenda that we've been talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Fabulous, great. And looking back at your career so far, what have been the kind of the key stepping stones, do you think, that's in hindsight, and the beauty of hindsight, has kind of led you to where you are? You probably don't feel there was a plan in place. I don't, maybe you do, but what have been the key moments that have really helped you to kind of to be where you are right now?
It's always that mix, isn't it, of some of the things that you planned or tried to plan, and then the serendipitous things that come along. And so so I guess I've had a career track, academic kind of progression, if you like. Since an undergraduate, I've been an academic, and so I did my PhD. After my PhD, I actually I did something which at the time was quite unusual. As I went and worked for the Natural History Museum for 5 years as a research fellow, and that was a really important time for me. The time when the notion of biodiversity, the term biodiversity, was beginning to be used, and the notion that this was something really important, crystallizing around that biodiversity term and concept. And that was a great time to be based in one of the world's leading sort of taxonomic, systematic organizations, filled with people who kind of knew about different groups and were passionate, spent their lives working on some group of beetles that no one else, most people in the world had never heard of, and being immersed in that, as well as walking through the door into what's kind of one of the best offices to walk into anywhere. Yeah. So that was a really pivotal thing for me. I think different points of mixing with particular academics and kind of different viewpoints has been always very important to me. And then my career has kind of spanned that time when in recent academia, you could go back to the earlier periods when people were kind of more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, if you like. But I've lived through that the growth in that notion that academia needs to, a lot of academics need to become a bit more interdisciplinary in their working, and that's become a very dominant theme of what I do. So I work a lot with people who I work with, engineers and architects and psychologists and all sorts of different people, and I really enjoy that. And the fact that that's become not just a sort of increasingly acceptable thing to do, but actually a recognition that we're only going to solve many of the big pressing problems by those kind of engagements, has been great for me personally. I mean, I very much enjoy those interactions and sitting down with people whose fields I know almost nothing about and hearing them get excited about what they do and why it's important.
Which is exactly what I'm doing right now with you. Where do you think academia is going, or more specifically, what skills are going to be more increasingly valuable into the future for conservation scientists, or however we term the work that you do? So you've mentioned one, being more interdisciplinary, being able to work with lots of different types of organizations. Are there other skill sets that people should keep an eye on in terms of being more valued or being more useful into the future?
So I think that one is really important. I mean, I think I guess the history of conservation biology, there were periods when this was what you kept away from people, basically. We'll keep people out, and that's the best. And of course that can't happen and shouldn't happen. And I think that and understanding more about people and interacting with those who understand about people and people's motivations and behaviors and how you can help shape and influence some of that, I think is important. I think that's also that growing sense of desperate urgency, and that sense that, and I think that's something that is really quite difficult in this field, because in a sense you can become quite what's the word I'm looking for? when you're faced with that kind of day in, day out, people respond to it in different ways, and some people start to ignore it after a while.
Yeah, like numb
hard
to
to deal with, and yet that's the reality that we have to. So figuring out how you're going to deal with that for yourself, and how you operationalize that on a day-to-day, without sort of waking up totally stressed about everything every morning, I think is important. And actually, certainly from the academic side of conservation biology, I think the demand to, you could argue that conservation biology is a crisis discipline. But actually, quite a lot of what happens is more esoteric, and I think that notion that actually there is a crisis going on, and how do we move things forward most effectively?
Yeah. And in the context of, I guess, careers advice, sort of sticking to the theme, if there are people listening, who are keen to kind of follow in your footsteps a bit and work in similar areas to you, perhaps become an academic, work in conservation research, conservation science, what advice would you give someone like that who's listening? They might be a student at university or thinking about, that sort of path. What are the kind of key things they should bear in mind? What things would help them and make a difference to them?
Well, I think there are lots of opportunities out there. There are lots of paths into the area, and I guess they're growing, the number of opportunities, and particularly as recognition of the importance of this is spreading societally much more. I think where conservation ecologists, conservation biologists might be working could transform a lot in the coming years. Mm-hmm. You see lots of organizations getting very interested in what are their impacts, what are their dependencies, how do they improve things. One could see all sorts of things. So I think it's a really exciting time. Getting well grounded in the essentials remains important, and going to good universities like Exeter to actually do your studies, and I think probably also I think sometimes I see people kind of just trying to walk a very, very narrow path, and getting frustrated, that being kind of a bit more open-minded, and that there's things don't take you quite where you thought you were going to go. But that can be a good deal of fun and interest, and make for great careers.
Yeah, and that sort of serendipity you mentioned earlier, actually sort of following opportunities, is what I'm hearing from you there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And there are lots of great opportunities out there now. Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I'm really conscious of time. I want to make sure that we wrap up. We've plenty of time. You've got a commitment after this. We also have a small audience listening to us from our Conservation Careers membership. So I'd like to hand over to them after recorded, let them ask a couple of questions too. So as we kind of start to wrap up, I'd like to ask just a couple more kind of open questions, really, to kind of hear about how you think and tick a little bit. Nothing too tricky. Well, maybe. We'll see. One question I'd like to ask is, if we could make you a czar for the day, just a global czar, and you could make any law change or enact any treaty or whatever it is you'd like to do to help tackle biodiversity loss specifically, what sort of single thing would you enact, or what law might you create?
That no matter the scale at which you had control over land or sea, so whether that's you've got a little patch of ground somewhere, or you run a big estate, or you're responsible for that, a given proportion of that had to be given over to nature.
I love that, and that's so simple and so scalable. Yeah. Do you have a portion in mind, or we'll leave that open to debate?
Well, let's say 20%.
Yeah, so 20% for nature of anything that anyone's got.
I guess, yes. I mean, I guess globally, of course, people would talk about 30%.
Yeah, 30 by 30, yeah.
It's but I think that notion that every at the heart of that kind of pitch is that I think this is an area in which everyone can contribute, even in their own small ways. It doesn't. We don't all have to own big estates or have control of this. This is something that actually we can all do something, and that something always does matter a little bit.
Yeah. And I love that. And that connects to something I believe also is you don't have to be paid to be a conservationist. It's not this career title that sits on a pedestal. It's something that anyone can do in their spare time. And if you're doing anything to help, you're a conservationist, And if it's in your garden, I'm looking at my garden right now, that's enough, for many of us. And that's great. Yeah. If I could place you in one location to see one species, anywhere in the world, any species that you care about, where would you go? What would you look at?
I do like elephants. Yeah. And I've been fortunate enough to spend quite a lot of time watching elephants. And I will quite happily spend more time watching elephants, yeah.
And where would that specifically be? Have you got a particular place in mind, or?
It's probably somewhere in Southern Africa. I'd quite happily watch elephants anywhere, actually.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And finally, I think it links back to something you touched on earlier a little bit. Are you optimistic about the future of biodiversity? And how do you stop some of the issues that we're facing actually sort of getting on top of you and sort of bringing you down? They feel quite interlinked. How do you stay sane when we're tackling such an urgent crisis?
I guess one has to remain optimistic, otherwise you just wouldn't kind of carry on. I think there are big things we can do if we're willing to do them, and actually, some of the lessons coming out of some of the restoration and kind of wilding campaigns is, it's amazing how quickly things can change. With the right will and the right background to those things. I think one has to remain optimistic that things can change, whilst there's a good deal of pessimism around whether they actually will. But if we all sit quietly and say nothing because we're too pessimistic, then we're not going to bring those things about. So there's a lot of drive there to actually push those things and see what we can make happen.
Yeah, brilliant. Kevin, it's been really nice talking to you on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, and I guess particularly the Renew project, the program, where should they go? Where should they send them? And can they get involved? Are there ways in which people can get involved?
So we have if you search for Renew, the Renew project on the web, you'll find that. If you search for me on the web, you'll find me. And we are reaching out. Actually, a lot of our work is about different sectors, and so we are actively reaching out to people to engage with some of our work. But we're always happy to hear from others.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll also provide links in the notes. If people are listening and want to find out more, people can click off from that. Kevin, once again, thank you for joining the podcast. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.